Hello, dear subscribers and guests of our channel. Today, we invite you to join us in exploring one of the most mysterious and, at the same time, grand structures in human history, the Great Wall of China. For many centuries, this structure has attracted the attention of travelers, researchers, and simply curious people from all over the world. A vast number of understatements, legends, assumptions, and controversial claims have formed around it. There are so many hypotheses and different interpretations that it sometimes becomes difficult to determine where real historical facts end and guesswork and myths begin. Throughout its long history, through changing dynasties and eras, this wall has been perceived as a symbol of the power and resilience of the Chinese Empire. Yet, at the same time, it has become an object of heated debate. Some claim that the loopholes on the wall are mainly oriented to the south, while others are convinced they face north and defend their position no less persuasively. So, which of these statements is closer to the truth, and does either side have truly serious arguments? In this episode, I will try to consider several common misconceptions, draw attention to details that usually remain without proper notice, and attempt to understand the features that make this structure even more mysterious and interesting to study. I want to emphasize right away, everything discussed below is merely my own observations, reflections, and an attempt to pose questions. Perhaps you will disagree with some conclusions, and that is absolutely normal, as every point of view has a right to exist. Moreover, I will be only too glad to receive your comments and constructive criticism. Often, history popularizers on YouTube demonstrate only those sections of the wall that fit well into the official historical version. Their videos frequently show only one side of the wall line, while many other features remain behind the scenes, although it is these details that can significantly change the perception of the purpose of this structure. In such videos, one can see sections where loopholes are located on both sides of the wall, or it is noticeable that they were moved during later reconstructions, and such details inevitably raise new questions. But why are those sections that restorers have practically not touched almost never shown? It is there that curious features can be noticed. If you look from the north, the wall often turns out to be noticeably lower, and in some places, stairs have been preserved that lead onto it directly from the outside. This makes one wonder, does it mean that a potential enemy could relatively easily climb onto the wall? In addition, some towers have loopholes facing not toward the perceived threat, but in the opposite direction, which only increases the bewilderment. A perfectly logical question arises. How were the defenders supposed to repel an attack from the north if the defensive elements are oriented to the south? However, the oddities do not end there. The Great Wall of China stretches for more than 20,000 kilometers and represents a complex of various sections built in different periods, under different dynasties, and for different reasons. Over time, it was repeatedly rebuilt, reinforced, remodeled, partially destroyed, and then restored again. As a result, analyzing the entire structure becomes extremely complex and multi-layered. In some sections, it seems obvious that the fortifications were indeed created for protection against northern nomadic tribes, while in others, the impression arises that they performed a completely different function. Loopholes could be moved, walls heightened, gates widened, towers rebuilt, and the entire line gradually turned into a real historical puzzle for those trying to understand its original purpose. Sometimes it feels as if each individual section reflects not only the tasks of its time, but also completely different ideas about what a defensive system should look like. Particular attention is deserved by the fundamental lower part of the wall, which is talked about much less often, although it is this part that can change the perception of the entire structure. The base of the wall is made of much higher quality, more durable, and more carefully processed material compared to the upper layers. If you look closely at the photographs, you can see that the lower stone blocks are massive, well fitted to each other, and look very reliable and monumental, as if they were created not only to protect against enemies, but also to withstand the destructive force of time. At the same time, the upper part of the wall in many places is made of brick, which is most often attributed to the Ming Dynasty period. The mortar used to join these bricks differs in both color and structure, and the bricks themselves often look coarser and less durable. All this clearly indicates that the upper parts of the wall were repeatedly rebuilt and restored in later eras. One gets the impression that the lower level of the structure was created by people with a very high level of construction technology and significant resources, whereas in the construction of the upper layers, either simpler methods were used, or construction standards changed, or the purpose of the structure itself became different. Such a contrast is hard to miss, and it inevitably raises new questions. Can one find European fortresses built on a similar principle, with an exceptionally strong stone base and a relatively weaker upper part? Usually, it is the other way around. The strongest materials are used for key defensive elements. Here, it seems as if the foundation was of primary importance, while the upper part became merely a later superstructure. Such differences lead some researchers to suggest that the Great Wall of China might not have originally had only a defensive purpose. Historical circumstances, the political situation, and internal changes in the empire could well have influenced its functions and appearance. Perhaps it served not only for protection but also for the demarcation of territories, control of people's movement, a demonstration of the state's power, or even for some other tasks that we can only guess at today. In some regions, the wall is made entirely of brick, and this may indicate that by the time of the reconstructions, the ancient structures were almost completely destroyed. Workers had to virtually build the wall anew, and the new building material created only the outward appearance of the structure, which could differ significantly from the original. The more carefully you study these details, the clearer it becomes how ambiguous the true history of the wall can be, and how much it could have changed over the past centuries. Interesting thoughts also arise after familiarizing oneself with the works of the famous historian Lev Gumilyov. He drew attention not only to specific historical facts, but also to the general logic of historical processes. Gumilyov asked a rather provocative question. Are we really dealing with a classic defensive system in the usual sense? Can it be said with certainty that it was built by those to whom official historiography attributes this construction? And could it not have been reinterpreted much later, when only ruins remained of the ancient structures? He wrote that at one time, the height of the wall reached about 10 meters, and every 60 to 100 meters there were watchtowers. At first glance, this indeed looks like a powerful defensive complex. However, shortly after the completion of construction, a serious contradiction appeared. The Chinese army turned out to be not numerous enough to effectively defend such an extensive line of fortifications. If a small garrison were placed in each tower, the enemy could destroy it even before help arrived. If the size of the garrisons was increased, huge gaps appeared between them, through which the enemy could penetrate deep into the territory. Thus, the effectiveness of such a defensive system turned out to be very doubtful. A fundamental question arises. Was the Great Wall of China truly a full-fledged defensive structure? Or did it primarily serve a symbolic function, demonstrating the power of the empire rather than being a practical military shield? After all, A fortress without a sufficient number of defenders ceases to be a fortress in the full sense of the word. And here the main paradox arises. It turns out that the Chinese supposedly for centuries erected a gigantic line of fortifications without considering how many people would be needed for its defense. And we are talking about almost 9,000 kilometers of fortifications, and according to some data, more than 21,000 kilometers. Protecting such a vast expanse is practically impossible. And if you think about this, the question arises, was such a construction project rational at all? Could the same result have been achieved with significantly fewer means and on a smaller scale? The answer to this question seems obvious, yet it too should be considered separately. There is a point of view according to which the Great Wall of China is not at all a structure built by the Chinese in the 2nd century BC, and its original purpose could have been completely different. Some researchers suggest that it could have served as an ancient line of control, a transport road, or a system for regulating movement through inaccessible areas. And when the Chinese later encountered the semi-ruined remains of these structures, they began to restore them, building up the upper parts with brick and gradually forming the construction that we call the Great Wall of China today. In that case, the ancient object could have had a completely different purpose, and the history of its origin could have been reinterpreted later. Then, the main question arises, who actually built this grandiose structure? What civilization could have possessed such resources, technologies, knowledge, and organization in deep antiquity? In the next episodes, we will certainly continue to consider this topic and try to analyze various versions that may help us get closer to understanding the true origin of the wall. Friends, share in the comments. What do you think about this story? If the video was interesting, support us with a like and a subscription to the channel. Until next time,